In sort of a surprise update, Destiny Patch 2.3 will be coming on June 14th. On This Week at Bungie, a lot of class changes were discussed, mostly focused on the Hunter. The Hunter is getting some nerfs, buffs, and changes across all subclasses, so let's see what's up. I'll have my thoughts after I go over all of the notes. Let's start with the Gunslinger. The first major change is with regards to trip mines. Trip mines will no longer attach to enemies and will instead arm on impact, then bounce, and they also deal 3% less damage. This was done because people were using it as a sticky and Bungie wanted to move it more towards being a trap. In response, they also buffed the Swarm Grenade. The arming radius was increased by half of a meter, and detonation damage was buffed by 7%. This will hopefully make it a more desirable option. Next is Golden Gun. We all know that Golden Gun really lacks in damage in PvE, so it's getting buffed. The base damage was increased by 50% with an additional 30% on top of that versus AI, and Deadeye now increases Golden Gun damage by another 30%. The throwing knife is getting nerfed. It will now no longer be possible to one-shot headshot a low armor target with a throwing knife with the Incendiary Blade upgrade. Circle of Life, aka a perk that nobody uses, is getting changed up. Circle of Life now makes it so precision throwing knife kills reduce your Golden Gun cooldown, aka it gives you a bunch of super energy, perhaps similar to Amplify for Striker Titans. It no longer extends the duration of Golden Gun and had its +1 armor removed. As for perks, the Scavenger perk got a 33% buff. You get 33% more energy now. Chain of Woe got +1 recovery, and Over the Horizon got its +1 recovery taken away. Blade Dancer is up next with mobility being up first. Blink now incurs a -1 recovery penalty, and Blink Strike lunge distance was reduced by 0.4 meters. This was done because Blade Dancer relocation abilities were too advantageous, so they're trying to reduce that advantage. Chances are you've been one-shot by a Blink Strike to the face before. Bungie is looking to reduce the amount of times that happens by reducing the valid angle at which Backstab will proc by 30 degrees. Escape Artist had its invisibility effect delayed by 0.5 seconds, apparently some visual issues were to blame, and Fast Twitch was recharging just a bit too fast, so its recharge rate was nerfed by 20%. Arcblade is getting some big changes. Arcblade is supposed to be about precision and decisive strikes, not exactly spamming it non-stop to either gain a bunch of speed, stay in the air, or avoid enemy fire. As a result, the following changes will be happening. The base duration for Arcblade is getting increased by 2 seconds. The hit search range is getting increased by half of a meter. Energy cost on hit was decreased by 20%, and here are the nerfs. Energy cost per swing increased by 20%, and a 0.8 second cooldown was added to Arcblade swings while airborne. In addition, Arcblade in PvE, well, it was complete garbage. It was one of the, if not the worst PvE damage super, so it is getting buffed. Arcblade damage has been increased by 30% in PvE. The Encore upgrade now extends Arcblade's duration and grants a 150% increase to Arcblade damage for a short time. Vanish will now cause the player to vanish on cast in addition to its normal functionality, and the Showstopper damage radius has been extended by 1 meter. Next up, Night Stalkers. Spike Grenade is one of those grenades that just isn't picked. As a result, Bungie is changing the way it is dealing damage. Instead of doing a lot of ticks for low damage, it'll do less ticks for higher damage. Ticks were reduced from 10 to 5, but damage per tick was increased by 100%. The total damage dealt thus remains unchanged. This applies to every other instance of Spike Grenade in the game, not just Night Stalkers. I know a lot of people are going to be happy about this next one. Shadow Shot now applies the suppression effect on impact. Turns out that yes, launching a Shadow Shot only for it to not trigger fast enough so you get killed by a super isn't very fun. Hooray. Smoke grenades are getting some changes. Right now, it is incredibly obnoxious to be hit by the Smoke Void Wall or Smoke Vortex combo. There's basically no chance of escape. so Bungie would like to give players a chance for some counterplay. Smoke grenade impact damage was buffed by 34%, with the impact suppression and damage over time being reduced by 1 second. Jump suppression was removed from the initial impact status effects. The base and envenomed cloud durations were increased by 1 second. Envenomed jump suppression was removed from cloud status effects. Vanish and Smoke had its agility bonus removed, and the snare cloud duration was increased by 1 second. So basically, what all that means is that the cloud lasts longer, but opportunities to escape it were increased. Night Stalker perks, except for Shade Step, are getting buffed to make them more desirable. Courage of the Pack now increases all stats by 2 per stack instead of 1, and stacks up to 3 times instead of 5, so you can get those max stats a bit easier. Lockdown increases smoke duration by 2 seconds, with another 2 seconds with the snare upgrade to kind of counter the smoke changes, and Predator now reduces the cooldown of Shadow Shot. Shade Step is getting changed, I guess you can say nerfed. In its pre-2.3 form, the ability to jump around like a crazy person was just really overwhelming to opponents, and Bungie didn't want to make it that easy for Night Stalkers to be able to disengage or disorient enemy players. You can now no longer do 2 Shade Steps in a row anymore. Instead, it is now on a 3-second cooldown on a single dodge. So you'll probably average about the same amount of Shade Steps per minute, but now they'll have to be more spaced out. You can't just spam it. The Twilight Garrison is also getting the exact same treatment, 1 dodge every 3 seconds. Now we have some more general changes. First up, damage supers in PvE. They are not very good. They are getting buffed. Hooray. Hammer of Soul damage increased by 10% in PvE. Fist of Havoc and Nova Bomb base damage increased by 50% for everything, and an additional 50% in PvE. Storm Trans damage was increased by 10% in PvE. Sunbreakers were struck the slightest bit too hard in their nerfs, so Bungie is bringing them back up a tad. Hammer of Soul travel speed was increased by 1.3%, and the detonation radius of hammers was increased by 10%. Sunsingers, you're up next. Firebolt wasn't nerfed in the previous patch. This made people very angry, but your time has come. Firebolt grenades have had their arming time increased by 0.2 seconds, and their search radius was reduced by 1 meter. This makes it easier to escape Firebolt grenades on their edge, but well-placed throws will still connect with ease. In addition, Viking Funeral is also getting changed. Viking Funeral no longer extends the duration of Ignite effects, and instead now weakens the target afflicted with Ignite effects, causing them to take 5% more damage from all sources except for the Ignite damage, stacking up to 3 times. Flame Shield is also getting nerfed. It'll now take an additional 0.3 seconds for it to activate. So if you do find yourself in those 1v1 melee battles, you might now actually have a chance of winning. That does it for all of the class changes. Let's move over to weapon changes. Not too many changes here though. Hand cannons are getting some adjustments. Low range hand cannons are getting increased initial accuracy and decreased accuracy drop. All hand cannons are also getting a small PvE damage increase based on the enemy. But the biggest change is that the damage fall off of hand cannons was made steeper to better emphasize the range that they are intended for. Speaking of hand cannons, Hawkmoon is getting the slightest stability decrease to make barrel selection more important and to counter the changes that all hand cannons got. Next up are auto rifles, specifically bullet hoses. They are getting a 6% damage nerf. No longer will Doctrine of Passing torment the battlefield, at least not as much. However, one of the reasons those bullet hose auto rifles were so good is because of counterbalance. Counterbalance is getting reduced to 80% recoil angle reduction as opposed to 90%. Counterbalance is just way too good, and so they had to bring it down. A nice quality of life change here, the time it takes for the game to automatically give you ammo when you're running very low has been reduced. Sometimes there are just times where you can't get ammo, and so this change should help. Couple of more minor things. Thunderlord and Super Good Advice were ignoring some stats incorrectly. That has been fixed. And the Defiance of Yasmin Sniper has had its zoom correctly adjusted to reflect the changes made to snipers in patch 2.2, with its inventory stat increased by 10 to compensate. Those are a significant amount of the changes coming to Destiny in patch 2.3 on June 14th. There were also 2 more notes, both explaining what rangefinder actually does and what weapon handling actually means. You can find info for those in the description. Alrighty, time for thoughts. Well, let's start with the overwhelmingly good. Damage supers in PvE were buffed. Excellent buff. This might actually make people try different things and not feel completely terrible about their selection in subclass. Next up, Firebolt and Bullet Hose nerfs. A lot of people complaining about those, and both of them got nerfed. I expect nothing other than pure happiness in the comments about those 2 things specifically, because all I hear about those things is how they gotta be nerfed. They're nerfed. Rejoice. Right now. Another thing, Shadow Shot Suppression activation. This should also make a lot of people very happy, self included. Now for some stuff I'm pretty happy about. Swarm Grenade buffs, Circle of Life change, Scavenger buff, Backstab fix, Spike Grenade damage change. All of these to me are good. They're trying to buff the stuff that no one is using to make it more appealing, and I've always been about weapon and perk parity, so those are good. The Smoke Grenade changes I'm pretty fine with. Right now, if you get caught in that double grenade combo, you're basically dead and there's no counterplay. The counterplay is the other person missing the grenades. I think the combo will still be pretty effective. It might just not be a guaranteed kill every single time now, and if you're hit, you actually have a chance of escaping. Yeah, I know you gotta give up both cooldowns to use it, but with tier 5 stats being pretty easy to get in both discipline and strength, it really wasn't that much of a sacrifice to do the combo. Shade Step, well, as someone who plays against more hunters than plays as a hunter, it sounds reasonable, but feedback that I've seen so far has said that it's okay. It's not really going to be the get out of bad situation free card anymore. You can't just spam it and get away. You need to have better planning and timing of using your Shade Step. I was very surprised that they tossed that effect onto the Garrison though. Shade Step is a subclass ability, but Twilight Garrison was an exotic, so you had to give up your exotic slot specifically for it. I guess I can see the reasoning as to why they did it. I'm just very surprised that it happened. I'm going to be keeping close eyes on the Garrison in PvP after this patch. Arc Blade changes I'm pretty neutral on, simply because I don't play nearly enough Blade Dancer to really comment. To me, I like them because now maybe Arc Blade will become something more than activate then mash button as much as humanly possible. Nothing about any of the Blade Dancer changes to me were questionable. I think everything put out was pretty reasonable as far as changes went. Stuff I'm iffy on are throwing knives and trip mines. The knives change was to combat dying to burning damage as a low armor player. I guess I'm alright with this. I feel like getting a knife headshot should be very rewarding, but at the same time, gunslingers already get the benefit of a ranged attack as a melee attack, but it does require a lot of accuracy. I don't think it's the biggest problem. A lot of people don't seem to run low armor builds anyway, so you could say why even change it if no one runs low armor, but if no one runs low armor, then no one dies to it anyway, so who cares if it's changed or not? Nah. The trip mine nerf was probably the most surprising to me. I never found sticking people to be a problem with trip mines. I don't think it was exactly the easiest thing to stick people with trip mines. It's not exactly people were using them like fusion grenades too often. Trip mine already struggles to one-shot high armor targets. If you were a high armor target, then you just, for the most part, didn't die to a trip mine if you ran into it. So the damage nerf was not really expected either. I don't think trip mines really needed to be touched in the grand scheme of things. Overall, I think there's way more good than there is bad in there. Obviously, we'll see how all of this translates to the live game very soon. Even if I didn't agree with everything, I can see why most of the changes were done, and the majority of changes seemed within the realm of reason. PvE supers getting buffed is probably the most exciting thing in this patch. It means everyone gets to actually change up things every once in a while without feeling very hindered. But that is what I have for you guys on the patch notes. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you next time.